Happy Wednesday. You're halfway through the week already. Thanks for joining us. I'm Shawn Drozar. That's Sandy Clough. This is Sandy and Shawn on Mile High Sports. Danny Bailey is the man making everything work behind all these cameras, and thank you for joining us. We'll turn our attention to some of the offseason surroundings with the Denver Broncos. We understand, Sandy, that with minicamp over, it's essentially done until training camp. And so what did we learn from some of these things? And we've gone over it, not terribly much. But feeling a little bit vindicated this week because we talked about, well, both of these things. ESPN today put out its grades for the offseason of all 32 teams. Really was last night, so don't shortchange them. They were quicker with their writers. And with the Denver Broncos, they gave them an A through F grade. With the Broncos, they gave them a B minus, and they picked out specifically the biggest move, the move they liked, and the move they didn't like. So the biggest move for the Broncos, not surprised, drafting Bo Nix, getting their quarterback, at least of the near-term future, their QB1 on day one. That makes sense. What was fascinating, maybe the most part of it, though, is the move that the folks at ESPN's NFL Nation liked was drafting Bo Nix, even though he was the fifth quarterback taken, 12th overall, sixth quarterback taken. Most people believe that about half the league had a second-round grade on him, but it's further validation about what we've talked about, that fit is the NFL's dirty secret when it comes to the draft. And the fit with Bo Nix and Sean Payton is ideal. Where it leads to, we don't know. But we know that the fit, hitting the middle of the field, quick release of the passes, short and accurate deliveries, the fit is just right.
The fit is exactly right. And the fit is so good that in Sean Payton's mind, I'm guessing he would have taken Bo Nix just about anywhere.
I agree with you.
Maybe not ahead of Caleb Williams.
But maybe as high as 2.
Maybe not ahead of Jaden Daniels. But he talks about Seth Walder in this piece, the analytics expert at ESPN. He talks about 3 quarterbacks in tier 1, which I assume includes May.
Mm-hmm.
I would not include May.
I wouldn't either.
I would not. I think the top tier belongs to 2 guys. And I actually think Daniels will be better than Caleb Williams, but Caleb Williams starts on a better team.
Yeah, he does.
He starts with
a lot more weapons.
So I think Caleb Williams has a better chance to be Rookie of the Year than Jaden Daniels has of being Rookie of the Year.
I like them both.
But after that, I think the Broncos, without question, would have taken Bo Nix ahead of May, ahead of Penix, ahead of McCarthy. I don't have any doubt in my mind about that. So I agree with Walter on that point, that the most likely move and the move they like best was one and the same, the drafting of Bo Nix. And there's nothing really that would approach the signing of Bo Nix, so the drafting of Bo Nix, the signing of Bo Nix, as their biggest move of the offseason. And I think that gets them up from C minus range into B minus territory. I really do. I don't know how good the team will be this year. We both think their record will slip from 8-9 down.
I think 7
and 10, 6 and 11, kind of that area. But I think Nix will be good. And I'm a little puzzled why so many people are talking about, well, he'd be better if he only played 10 to 13 games.
Yeah, I don't get that either. The one thing we've been learning, and Peyton Manning talked about it recently in town when he was being honored, but the idea that sitting on the bench helps you. And some of this, at least in recent NFL history, has been sort of brought to the fore by the idea, and it's erroneous because if you talk to either Aaron Rodgers or Brett Favre, neither one of them think it had to do with anything. Brett Favre was trying to hold on to his job, and Aaron Rodgers was trying to carve one out. That Aaron Rodgers somehow got better and was more ready to succeed because he sat and watched Brett Favre. Neither of those two men actually think it had anything to do with it. And if they don't, well, I certainly don't. Peyton Manning talked about it with Eli Manning, and the idea that both of them, by getting on the field early, even though Peyton Manning had an abysmal touchdown interception ratio in his rookie year.
But then look what he did in year number 2. Look how the team did. The team won 13 games in year number 2. And he very clearly stated that without year number 1, there would not have been 13 wins for the Indianapolis Colts in 1999.
Get a guy out there playing. He's got to be on the field. Bo Nix is 24 years old. He's as ready as he's going to get. The rest
that was
of
the
it,
whole point.
Yeah, the rest of it just requires him
that
being on the
lifted
NFL
his
field.
stock above and beyond not only 2, maybe even 3 of the quarterbacks who are drafted ahead of him in the minds of the Broncos, but in a completely different sphere and tier from any of the other quarterbacks who were taken later.
And it's part of what knocked him down compared to some of the other quarterbacks, because they looked at a J.J. McCarthy who has a comparatively limited body of work on a running offense team in which he was only asked to throw more than 20 times, a handful of times. But McCarthy was younger, and so people like the idea of projecting, which is all well and good. But I will argue that this drafting of Nix to me makes more sense, because the biggest value you have, and look no further than the Broncos' last quarterback, Russell Wilson, for an example. When the Seattle Seahawks beat the Denver Broncos in Super Bowl 48, they did so with Russell Wilson on a rookie contract. It's one of the reasons they were allowed to have the tremendously stacked defense they had. When you look at a lot of teams that go and make their runs with young quarterbacks that turn out to be great, they're on rookie deals, or at least not on the deals in which they're breaking the bank. And so the more you can maximize the rookie deal of a quarterback, the better off you are. And it stands to reason that, quite frankly, maybe J.J. McCarthy turns out to be some Hall of Famer one day. I don't know. But as opposed to J.J. McCarthy from, let's say, 21 to 24 years old and the growth involved there, I think if you're only going to have a guy for that long, I'd rather have Bo Nix from 24 to 28, thinking that I'm probably getting the best out of him. And yeah, you look down the road and say, well, you might have J.J. McCarthy for 4 or 5 years longer. Cool, if he's a 15-year player in the NFL, but do you know how many of those really are? In this case, I'd rather maximize what I've got right now, and I think that Nix was the right pick for the Broncos, even though I still have questions about Sean Payton. I have questions about Nix, but Sean Payton is the head coach, and if I'm going to get him a rookie quarterback, besides Daniels and Williams, this is the one I would pick too.
As we outlined yesterday, there have been, over the last 10 years before this one, a different quarterback head coaching combination every year.
That's amazing.
And there have been high hopes for virtually all of those tandems over the last decade, right?
Yep.
And they have turned out to be somewhere between disastrous / fireable. The idea that either the quarterback or the head coach was going to get fired at the end of the year, sometimes both, or in effect both, because Russell Wilson was forever diminished in the eyes of Sean Payton.
Correct.
We now know. By the way, he played in 2022. So even when he improved in 2023 and played a lot better than he had in 2022, Sean Payton still saw only the mistakes, even though there were fewer of them. Sean Payton saw Russell Wilson defined only by his mistakes, not by his 26 touchdown passes, not by his passer rating, which was one of the highest in the league. Sean Payton looked to things like fumbles and quarterback rating, which was right around 50, which, when it's quarterback rating we're talking about, is a 1 to 100 measurement. 50's average.
Not passer rating.
And
where
I don't even
over 100,
think Sean Payton thought in his heart of hearts that Russell Wilson was even average last year. So I can see why what you just said about being a little skeptical about both Payton and Nix is warranted, because 10 times before, we've been sold a bill of goods.
Right.
From Peyton Manning to Gary Kubiak, as opposed to John Fox. Now, it was Manning's last year, and obviously his physical skills had deteriorated. And the Broncos won the Super Bowl that year with a great defense. But in 16, it started with Kubiak and Simeon, and it really hasn't gotten better. I would argue that it's only gotten worse. I thought the Kubiak-Simeon combination,
well, that was the last Broncos
7-3 after 10 games and 8 points ahead of Kansas City in game number 11 with 3 minutes to go. And if they win that game, they probably make the playoffs, and there's a pretty good chance that they even win the division. And Kansas City wouldn't have had that long winning streak and head-to-head competition against the Broncos. That was as good as it got. And people in 2016 thought, wow, that's awful. But we'll have Paxton Lynch next year.
Right.
Combined with a new coach.
Who never, by the way, became number one starter.
Never did.
At any point. And
Never did.
I'll run over it real quick. She had it right. 2014, John Fox and Peyton Manning. These are the quarterback head coach pairings. 2015, the Super Bowl season, Gary Kubiak and Peyton Manning. Then Gary Kubiak and Trevor Siemian. Then Vance Joseph and Trevor Siemian after Kubiak stepped away from the game. Then Joseph and Case Keenum. Then Vic Fangio and Joe Flacco as they decided to switch that over.
That was disastrous.
Then Fangio and Locke. Then Fangio and Bridgewater. Then Hackett and Wilson, and then Peyton and Wilson, now Peyton and Nix. And when I look at it, I think of, again, do I have questions about whether Sean Payton's offense will continue to work in today's NFL? I do, but I do understand that his best chance of succeeding is if he has the kind of quarterback that does what he wants him to do. Nix does. I have questions about Nix's ability to be successful at the top level of NFL.
In other words, you have questions about ability to lift a team.
Correct.
He will be fine individually, but lifting a team, that's the kind of quarterback the Broncos need.
But when you're in
at
a
least
system with a coach that loves exactly what you do.
Yes. Oh, of course.
Is this going to be the next Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes? I can tell you with actually quite a bit of confidence, it will not. But will it be good enough to get the Broncos to the playoffs? Not this year, but maybe next year. One of the statements in that piece by Seth Walder over at ESPN that I think is interesting and probably worth noting, and we highlighted it there. They wrote, same thing we've been talking about. This team seems focused on 2025 and later. That might not be what Broncos fans want to hear, but I will tell you this.
They want to hear.
It is the right thing, because if you want the Broncos to not have a blip and a tease and maybe somehow sneak into a wild card one year, get boat raced, and then miss the playoffs for the next 5-6 years, this is the way to do it. You have to be sustainable, and you have to start with that head coach quarterback combination. Now they have that. And yeah, it means that this year's season is probably one step back to take 2 steps forward. But I think for the first time with the Broncos trying to just believe in what they've got and believe we'll keep pushing buttons and this year it'll work, there finally seems to be, with new ownership and Sean Payton, the idea that we're going to pull back, we're going to actually reset so we can go forward. And I think that that's absolutely the right choice at this point in time.
I would say quickly that it might be more one step forward, Bo Nix, to take 2 steps back in terms of an inferior record this year as opposed to 2023. And that's a very slight quibble. But I think one of the advantages in starting Nix instead of, let's say, Jarrett Stidham is you start Stidham, you're signaling, and this is why it won't happen.
Right.
You're signaling, we're going for the playoffs this year. Right. We're going with a guy who started the final 2 games last year, who replaced the benched Russell Wilson in the 16th and 17th games, the 17th and 18th weeks of the season. If you go with Nix, I think you do have a bit of a grace period. And the difference between Bridgewater and Locke in that charade of a competition in 22 with Vic Fangio was Vic Fangio knew it was his last year. He sure wasn't going with a younger quarterback. He was going with a steadier vet because his job was on the line. We talked about it all year in a different broadcast life. We talked about it all year that Fangio almost certainly, unless they made the playoffs somehow, was going to get fired. He was going to cast his lot with a veteran. It's just the opposite now. No matter what happens this year, barring 0-17 or 1-16, Sean Payton's going nowhere. He's got job security. He can go with a rookie.
Yeah, which means that if there are bumps along the road, he's not getting fired. I mean, this pairing is what's going to lead the Broncos back to the playoffs eventually if they get there. So they have that kind of grace period, even with the fans who would love to see wins right now. You're not going to get more wins right now with Jarrett Stidham. So why not play the young guy? And I quite frankly do think that even though that might be frustrating and even though that might lead to more losses than wins this year, I think quite frankly that fans are ready to see Bo Nix and are willing to probably live with some bumps and bruises because they know that this guy is their near-term hope. And I say near-term because I don't know if he's going to be here for 10 years, but they know it and they want to play him and they want to see it. And I think that's the right choice. So we'll have a chance to talk more about that as the offseason rolls along. Of course, the offseason down to just about under a month now as the folks will start reporting on the 17th of July for the Denver Broncos. And we'll talk a little bit about the NBA draft, which, by the way, is coming up rather quickly. What will the Nuggets do? An interesting mock draft makes me very happy. I'll talk about that in a moment, but I'll also want to remind you something that, well, also potentially could make me really happy about this time in a month. That's the 4th annual Colorado Whiskey Fest, which is coming to the Douglas County Fairgrounds next Saturday, July 13th. Food, wine, beer, and spirits vendors will be on site, including more than 50, that's 50 whiskey vendors. So if you are a fan of whiskeys, you will have an opportunity to sample so many different varieties. It'll make your head spin, maybe literally as well. So get a designated driver. The festival takes place from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. and features live music from the Kevin Austin Band and Mojo Filter. Tickets are available online right now at whiskeyfestcolorado.com. But if you use promo code MHS from Mile High Sports, you'll save $15. It's the Colorado Whiskey Fest presented by the Whiskey Cartel. And if you're 21 and up, get those tickets today at whiskeyfestcolorado.com. And remember to use promo code MHS to save $15 on your tickets. That's the 4th annual Colorado Whiskey Fest at the Douglas County Fairgrounds down in Castle Rock on Saturday, July 13th. By that date, Sandy, the Denver Nuggets will have completed their NBA draft. As a matter of fact, that's coming up extremely quickly. And the mock drafts are flying fast and furious, as one would expect. And there are interesting things to watch, especially about the University of Colorado. At the moment, you're talking about a Cody Williams going 9th overall in ESPN's latest mock to the Memphis Grizzlies, with them pointing out that even Atlanta, as the top pick, has worked him out. The teams in the top 5 are interested because, again, as we talked a little bit about guys like J.J. McCarthy, projectability tends to be something the GMs fall in love with, whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent. That's the truth. The Nuggets picking at 28th, they won't have that luxury.
The Nuggets will not have that luxury, but they may get a pretty good player.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll even get a player who can work his way into the rotation.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Next year.
Hey.
None of the 3 rookies from last year became part of the rotation. They gave a little
Julian Strother got a
Strother
right
early in the season. They gave him a peak. He had his ups and downs. Then he got hurt. And once he got healthy, he was never part of the rotation at all. Again, I mean, Justin Holiday, who was not in the rotation at the beginning of the year. In fact, Strother was playing ahead of Holiday. It was Holiday by the end of the year, and of course, during the course of the playoffs until the very end, who was part of the rotation with Reggie Jackson, with Peyton Watson, with Christian Brown. And of course, we all know by the end of the year, in Game 7 against Minnesota, that you had only Christian Brown coming off the bench. The other 3 disappeared, and obviously
it's like a YMCA team that had guys that were sick
play
that day.
Right.
Julian Strother averaged 10.9 minutes on the court per game in the regular season, and that
but
was with a good
game.
look. But even picture this. Among the Nuggets, do you know where that ranks? 11th in regular season minutes, behind DeAndre Jordan and Holiday, as you mentioned.
And Jordan didn't play in every game.
No,
so some of these per minute totals are a little.
But Jordan did
misleading.
start a couple of games, and Strother never did.
When
Jalen Pickett only averaged 4.5 minutes. Hunter Tyson 2.7 minutes, and only got in 18 games. Obviously, you have to get more impact from your younger players, and given the salary cap challenges for the Nuggets, they have to go with younger players once again. There's no choice. At 28, the folks at ESPN have them picking Deron Holmes II, the center for Dayton, just about 22 years old, will be 22 when the year starts. And the Jonathan Givney of Draft Express, who wrote this for ESPN, had an interesting point. Quote, most NBA teams are operating under the assumption Holmes has received a promise from the Nuggets, although it's possible the team might attempt to draft down a few spots to draft him for financial reasons. Holmes canceled a half dozen workouts shortly after the NCAA withdrawal deadline, with several smoking guns pointing in Denver's direction, a scenario that is similar to what we saw play out last year with Jalen Pickett. So in this case, what they're suggesting, and we hear that with the sort of the draft promises and stuff, is the Nuggets have basically decided they really like Deron Holmes, and much like maybe the Broncos with Bo Nix, that's the guy they've identified. They know he's going to be there. They like him. And they've basically given the word to Holmes, according to Givney, that you're not going to draft any further than us. We will take you if you don't get there sooner. I'm perfectly fine with that, and I'm perfectly fine if they move back for financial reasons. If you can still get your guy at the same time, we talk about it. Well, we've talked about a bunch of drafts. Don't mess around with it. If you have your guy, go get him. We're not talking about a first-round draft pick making the bank for the Nuggets. But in Holmes' case, 6'9", 235, similar build, though not quite as muscular as Aaron Gordon. Played center a lot for a very good Dayton team, a Dayton Flyers team that's been excellent for the last 5 years at minimum. When I say excellent, I mean top 25 caliber team. Averaged 20.4 points per game. Not a lot of players do that. Only 30 players in the country did. Holmes is one of them. 8.5 boards per game while shooting 54.4%. A junior.
It's your backup center.
There you go. There's your backup center, a guy that can actually step in and not mean that you're moving Aaron Gordon to center for the few minutes that you can afford to take Nikola Jokic off the court. If you grabbed a guy like Holmes, a junior, now we saw this last year, though, with Strother and Pickett and Tyson, a guy coming from a good program, a top quality program, a well-coached program, and not a younger player, a guy that should be, in theory, ready to step in and contribute with NBA minutes. Well, that happened with all three of the Nuggets picked last year, and Michael Malone still didn't play him. This, to me, feels like the biggest decision for the Denver Nuggets in the offseason because they are not going to get veteran help. It doesn't happen. The salary cap precludes it. Do you believe that Michael Malone, if they grab the right player, is going to change that? Do you believe he's going to change that anyway, and he's going to play younger players?
I think he has to.
It's come to realize he has no choice.
It's not. Presume for the sake of this conversation that they draft Holmes.
Okay, yeah.
For the sake of this conversation, we're looking at a mock draft by a knowledgeable observer, and he hears
and one that hears some things from behind the scenes.
He heard was that the Nuggets have basically told Holmes they're going to draft him.
And if you have a chance to look at Holmes, by the way, the last time you saw him was when they lost to Arizona.
Right.
And then
I remember.
And in that game, 23 points and 11 boards.
Yeah, he's a good player. Very good college player. Excellent college player. How that will translate into the NBA.
You never know.
But it's not like you're asking him to play 20, 25 minutes a game coming out.
You're probably asking him to play what, 12?
10 to 12?
Yeah.
10 to 12, maybe.
A guy that averaged 32.4 in his last season.
And I always think player development, once you get to the NBA, is overrated because you just don't practice enough.
No time.
During the season. You don't practice enough during the season to develop players unless they are playing. You develop Christian Brown by playing him. You develop Peyton Watson by playing him. You develop any rookie by playing Gillespie, him.
Tyson.
The problem is,
Holmes.
and I'd throw Gillespie in there too, they didn't play any of those guys. Malone was worried, I think, about their defensive shortcomings, first and foremost, for a defensive-minded head coach. And he was also worried that while they might shoot the three ball a little better than a Watson or a Brown would shoot the three ball, that you'd be giving up so much on the other end. It wasn't worth the exchange. And by the end of the year, even with two guys who weren't rookies, two guys in year number 2 in Brown and Watson, it seemed that Malone didn't want to play them together coming off the bench, because you'd be playing in terms of 3-point shooting 3-on-5, at the very least in terms of 3-point shooting, and maybe overall on offense, it'd be closer to 3-on-5, 3.5-on-5 than truly 5-on-5. But Malone has to play these guys, and I come back to the quote that was recently identified from Calvin Booth that did not appear last year in the Ringer piece in advance of the season. A lot of quotes from Calvin Booth in that piece, some of which he probably should have left unspoken.
And he attempted to retract. Right.
Yeah. But one of those quotes that didn't make the piece was Coach Malone has to play these 3 rookies because he has to find out about them. And maybe what he finds out is only one of the 3 can contribute for 10 or 15 minutes a game. Maybe that's what he finds out.
By the time
maybe
he finds out for the playoffs.
But he knows about all 3. So when the playoffs roll around, who can you trust is an actual question. This year, if you asked who can you trust among Strother, Tyson, and Pickett, the answer would be 0.
We still don't know.
0.
And that year in which you didn't end up defending your title and you got knocked out in the second round, like the last 5 champions before you, good luck for Boston next year. you ended up in a way sort of earning that year because you don't know any more about Strother, Pickett, and Tyson than you did at the beginning of last year. And that's a problem because those guys needed to develop. They needed to play. I do think Malone knows that, but that is one of the questions for Booth and Malone that they have to get on the same page. And it probably has to happen quickly because this situation for the Nuggets, especially in the early going, you've got to play the younger guys. Worth noting in that mock draft, by the way, we talked about University of Colorado and Cody Simpson, consistently mocked at number 17 to the Los Angeles Lakers, one Tristan Da Silva, which
yes, oh yeah,
I love for
I
Da
think
Silva.
That's a natural fit.
I don't love it for the Lakers, for the Nuggets having to play those guys, but for Da Silva, that wouldn't. That's an ideal fit. And for the Lakers, that would be a slam dunk.
No, I think it'd be a very good pick.
Pick.
I think he would be in the rotation. By the way,
I do
with the Lakers. I don't think there's any doubt about that. A quick point about
he's ready.
Quick point about Boston because we talked about it a little bit yesterday. The Celtics will have, I think, some problems that you identified yesterday. But not necessarily next year.
Not necessarily.
I think next year they're in better shape because remember, going back to previous champions, Nuggets lost Bruce Brown.
Right.
Golden State lost Gary Payton II. Eventually, but they lost him initially, and Otto Porter on their championship team. Milwaukee lost P.J. Tucker. The Lakers lost Danny Green and Rajon Rondo. And Toronto lost Kawhi in 2019. Boston not losing anybody like that.
Not
so
this year.
I think Boston has a better chance to make a serious bid next year. But I thought it was put well by The Athletic today. And Hollander, right? Who former NBA.
Yeah, John Hollinger.
John Hollinger, I'm sorry.
Creator of
John Hollinger made the point that Boston is great, but not inevitable. And many people thought, especially after they beat Boston twice head-to-head during the season and then dispatched the Lakers, because nationally, certainly, people always overrate the Lakers, that the Nuggets were pretty close to inevitable, at least to get back to the NBA Finals and probably play Boston. That was inevitable until it wasn't, until they blew a 20-plus point lead in Game 7 of the Minnesota series.
The other notable draftees in this mock draft, KJ Simpson of Colorado, that would be the third Colorado player selected, going 52 overall to the Golden State Warriors. That would be a nice pickup for them too, an additional ball handler off the bench. Bronny James, not surprisingly, this is the second round Bo Nix, where everybody in the NFL knew that Bo Nix was going to the Denver Broncos. Bronny James at 55 goes to the Lakers. Everybody knows that's happening. That's just going to be the way it goes.
And no one else would draft.
And no one else cares. Everyone's like, fine, good luck. Number 56, though, will be the Nuggets' second pick. And that's a pick from the Timberwolves, mind you. They have them picking, again, a guy maybe familiar to Colorado basketball fans, Oso Ighodaro, the center from Marquette, last seen knocking the Buffs out of the tournament.
I like the Marquette guard, but he may be gone.
Kolek's expected to be gone even in the first round. He was mocked at number 23. But Ighodaro, the center, again, maybe, now if given is hearing the right things and the Nuggets are starting to go a little bigger, that would be a good sign. Ighodaro, 13.4 points, 6.9 rebounds a game, 57.8% shooting.
Goes that way.
6'10", 235. They've started to realize that Zeke Naji, nice guy, smart man, pleasant human being, can't play dead in a Western.
I hope Calvin Booth is as convinced of that as you are.
Me too.
His postseason comments did not necessarily reflect that.
They did not.
I think Michael Malone's with you on that point. And if they do draft a couple
they don't
of big
consult
men,
me. If they had a couple of years ago, I could have helped.
If I had a hat on, I'd tip it in your direction because you were arguing.
Well, that's about
the season that the Nuggets didn't have enough size.
No, they didn't.
And I'm not just talking about height. I'm talking about size that can play.
Rim protection.
Size you can trust.
Disrupt drives to the lane, and they had none of that. And maybe what Givney's hearing is that after going with Strother and Pickett and going a little smaller and maybe seeing enough out of Gillespie, that the brain trust sat together and said, okay, we're going to have to play those young guys, but now let's get to some big men so we can give Gordon, who battled injuries all year, Jokic, who is a juggernaut, but still ends up battling fatigue and playing through injuries. You got to give him some rest, and that means you're going to need some size. That's a big part of the equation. We will have a chance to pay our respects to my mind, not only one of the greatest the greatest baseball player in history, but one of the greatest athletes in American sports history, period. Willie Mays, who passes away at the age of 93. But first, a message from our friends at Zaner Harden Law.
Zaner Harden Law. We've talked about him many times on this program. No one ever plans to be part of a serious car accident, let's say, or suffer a major injury in such an accident. But if you've been involved in one, you know you need the best attorneys, and they exist at Zaner Harden Law. Kurt Zaner and Mark Harden are the types of lawyers you want handling your case every time. They're two of the most elite personal injury attorneys in Colorado and throughout the country. They have won nearly every award imaginable: super lawyers, top 100 national trial lawyers, trial lawyer of the year, and on and on. They've appeared in the Denver Post, on local news outlets, on Good Morning America. These guys handle the most important cases, and they work tirelessly to make this community a safer place. They have the respect of every insurance company. With all these multi-million-dollar verdicts coming down lately, that's very rare to have a combination of attorneys, lawyers who have the respect of the insurance industry. They have it. You're lucky that they exist here in our own backyard. If you've been involved in an auto accident, reach out to Zaner Harden today at yourstorywillbetold.com. That's yourstorywillbetold.com.
Well, it seems like we've been doing a few too many segments like this lately, but obviously after the passing of Willie Mays at the age of 93, an opportunity to celebrate not only an extraordinary life, but an extraordinary baseball life. And to my mind, and I can't say that I ever watched him play in person or on television, but I understand that the nature of the contemporaries and what you had read and what you had heard.
Go watch him on
I
YouTube.
understand the statistics, right? And after Willie Mays passes at 93, I thought about it last night, and some of this obviously comes from having a father that loved baseball, that grew up here in Denver when the Denver Bears were the minor league club for the Yankees, and so he ended up watching Yankees. And even though Mickey Mantle did not come through Denver, was more of a Mantle fan because watched the Yankees because it was the farm team here. But I remember even growing up, my father was a huge baseball fan and talked about as much as he loved Mickey Mantle and Al Kaline of the Tigers, his two favorite players.
Absolutely.
It would constantly say, but Mays was better than both of them. Mays could do anything on the baseball field. And all you have to do is you can look at the numbers any way you like it. But the word, the thing we use now, five-tool player, that was literally invented for Willie Mays and to an extent Mickey Mantle. Guys that could run, hit for average, hit for power, throw, and field. And Mays was absolutely elite at every single solitary one of them. And for decades.
That's
not for a small peak, for almost the whole career.
The difference with Willie Mays is that he excelled in every one of those areas. You talk about five-tool players today and maybe have to stretch a little bit in one of those five categories. I mean, they're pretty good. They're better than average, but they're not sensational. They're not the best.
Mike Trout, the closest of modern players, I suppose.
The perfect embodiment of the point came in 1954 in the World Series first game. Vic Wertz of Cleveland hits a tremendous drive to center field. And in the old Polo Grounds, center field was much larger than Coors Field. Center field, right? Much
Grounds,
larger.
Which it actually was
Polo Grounds, and I mean it really was. It was a huge park, except right down the lines. But Mays, at the crack of the bat, had to move like Usain Bolt just to get near the ball. At the crack of the bat, Mays read it and knew he would make the catch. All Mays was thinking about was the two runners on base. That's the only thing he thought about. After I catch it, what am I going to do to keep the runner from second tagging and not just going to third, but scoring?
Right.
Because he was more than 400 feet, well over 400 feet from home plate.
Center field, and that was, if you go, you can probably picture the play in your mind if you've ever watched a sports highlight. He's getting near the warning track, catches it over his shoulder. We call them the back shoulder fade in football, except they're not trying to get it to him in baseball. 475 feet to dead center. 475.
So he was about, let's say, 450.
And basically, for the equivalent, you sitting in Coors Field, it would be the equivalent of him catching it in the fountains at Coors Field.
Oh, yeah.
Inside
and then turning around and throwing a strike back toward the infield that prevented the runner from scoring from second base. prevented him from scoring. And many people who saw it said the catch was great. And those who watched Willie Mays throughout his career said, but he made 5 or 6 catches that were as good or better. The big deal about the play was the throw.
Right.
Cap flying off, as it often did. But the throw, the way he could throw, people remember the basket catch, but the way he could throw was at least as good, if not better, than the way he caught the ball. He was the best instinctive base runner in the history of the game. He was literally a manager on the field because many, if not all of his managers gave him defensive responsibility in positioning not just himself. He could do that with his eyes closed, but position the other 8 players on the field. Not other 8. You wouldn't have the pitcher and the catcher,
right?
But you'd have the entire infield. And his connection to the pitching, he called all the pitches.
Can you imagine?
He called all the pitches for many managers. Not so much with the Mets at the end of his career, but throughout most of his career with the Giants, he called the pitches. Not the catcher, not the manager. The center fielder called the pitches. No center fielder in the history of baseball called pitches. No one ran the bases like Mays. Mays hit in front of Willie McCovey of the Giants for much of his career.
I'd like to go through that
often, and this hurt his slugging percentage, he would hit the ball into the gap, and he would hold at first base because he knew if he went to second, they'd just walk McCovey.
Right. Even though he could have stolen it if he wanted to.
First, he would not steal, although he was a good base stealer and could steal whenever he wanted to. He was about winning the game, and he knew the Giants had a better chance if Willie McCovey wasn't getting walked 2 or 3 times in a game. So he would take certain doubles and stay at first base to, in effect, protect McCovey, allow McCovey to hit. And McCovey won an MVP award in 1969 because Willie Mays, well into his 30s by then, I think he was 38 as of May 5th, 1969. Willie McCovey won the MVP award because of things like that. And Willie McCovey knew exactly what was going on. And the other thing that I always remember, the greatest line about Willie Mays was from Tallulah Bankhead, who said there have been only 2 authentic geniuses in the world, Willie Mays and Willie Shakespeare. Those are the 2 geniuses in the history of the world.
And obviously only one of them is an American. And I think when you talk about Willie Mays' career, obviously coming up through with a time spent in the Negro Leagues, a game that will be celebrated. It was celebrated this week. Mays' legacy was always set to be celebrated at Rickwood Field tomorrow night when the Giants will play.
Isn't that something?
And obviously we'll change it. But I mean, the outpouring of support and respect is universal. When a video message was played during the Cubs game last night in Wrigley Field, the crowd uniformly stood up.
Oh, absolutely.
To watch the rest
and
of
they did the same thing at Rickwood Field because they had a minor league game involving the Birmingham Barons last night. They got the major league game of the Giants and the Cubs tomorrow night. And Willie Mays will be celebrated. Unfortunately, won't be able to watch the game as he had planned to do. He couldn't travel. And that word came out on Monday. And you knew that he was not in great health and really has been legally blind for many, many years. But Rickwood Field is where Willie Mays played his baseball.
And
he was 17 years old. And
he played only on the weekends because school was out.
Right.
He could only play with them on the weekends because he was otherwise going to school.
He went to school and he played baseball on the weekends. And it is safe to say that at the age of 17, 18, 19, when he was a teenager, late teenage years, playing for the Birmingham Black Barons, Negro Leagues, that Willie Mays at that point in 1948 at the age of 17 might have been the best player in baseball.
Well, in 1950, the age of 19, after the New York Giants signed him, he played with the Trenton minor league team. He hit in his 81
all-white team, other than Willie Mays.
353.
Yeah.
And then in the very next season, 1951, with AAA Minneapolis, in the 35 games where the Giants got a little bit of wisdom and called him up, he just hit 477.
Well,
good high school players,
you know what?
477.
And that was Leo DeRocher, who probably, had he had his druthers, would have called him up sooner, but they thought he needed just a little more seasoning. But the season wasn't 2 months old before they called him up. And you know who he replaced in center field? Though this player, rather famous, remained in the lineup, just wasn't the center fielder anymore. Bobby Thompson,
who then hit the shot around the world.
A famous home run
a
few months later in a playoff game that decided the pennant against the Dodgers.
Yeah.
The Giants win the pennant. The Giants win the pennant. The famous Russ Hodges call. Willie Mays was actually on deck, but Willie Mays took over in center field. He went 1 for 12, hit a home run off Warren Spahn, and then went 0 for 14. He was 1 for 26, and he was upset, didn't think he could cut it, at least as a hitter. And DeRocher was called into the locker room to speak with Willie Mays, and DeRocher said, I don't care if you go 1 for 200, you're my center fielder from this day forward. And that was a marriage made in heaven. In fact, one of Leo DeRocher's great lines was, if Mays could cook, I'd marry him.
Mays' career was interrupted by the Korean War back in 1952. He played in 34 games that year for the Giants. Before then,
didn't play at all.
Serving in for military service, missed all of 53. Came back in 54.
He would have hit 700 home runs.
Yes.
And even playing in Candlestick all
came back
those years.
In 1954, and all he did
52 and 53
was win the MVP.
Most of 52.
First year back, wins the MVP.
And
led the league in batting and hit 41 home runs.
Did win it in 65, 11 years apart.
11-year gap.
Should have won it at least half a dozen more times if they voted on MVP back then the way they do now, with the use of metrics, things like wins above replacement, things like OPS plus. You would have seen that he was unquestionably in 55, 58, 60, 62, 63, and 64 the most valuable player in the National League. Part of his problem was the Giants as a team were never as good as they should have been. And they were only as close as they were all those times because of Willie Mays. Not Orlando Cepeda, not Willie McCovey even, Willie Mays.
You look at career wins above replacement, which you can apply retroactively. Only 4 players in the history of baseball have a higher one than Willie Mays' 156.2. Number 1, Babe Ruth, who also gets that because he also pitched. Walter Johnson, the great pitcher of the early eras of baseball, along with Cy Young, that's 2 and 3, pre-integrated baseball. Number 4, Willie Mays' godson, Barry Bonds, and then Willie Mays. That's it. So if you're talking about wins above replacement among hitters, 2, Babe Ruth, Barry Bonds. And we know about some of the questions.
Barry Bonds won 7 MVPs. Mm-hmm. Willie Mays should have won 8. And the first to tell you that would be Barry Bonds himself. To my mind, the greatest baseball player who has ever lived. The statement coming from his son after he had passed said, from Michael Mays, said, my father passed peacefully among loved ones. I want to thank you all from the bottom of my broken heart for the unwavering love you have shown over the years. You have been his life's blood. And baseball obviously changes dramatically. There was before Willie Mays, there was after Willie Mays, and the style of play has never gone back. And so I don't know if there's a greater honor than to realize the sport changed because of the way you played. And still today, people are looking for the next Willie Mays. There won't
be. And they'll never find
one. But be another Willie Mays.
Spend a little time, if you can, tomorrow night watching the game. I believe Fox is broadcasting it from Rickwood Field, honoring Willie Mays at the beginning of it. As great a player, as great an athlete, and as well respected and liked a person that has probably ever played professional sports, all in one package in the United States. So hail and farewell to the Say Hey Kid. Obviously, it is a major loss. We'll stick with baseball in a moment. The Colorado Rockies had a fascinating run-in with the Dodgers and the umpires last night. But for the first time back in Denver in 2 years, LFA brings the middleweight championship to the Mile High City at LFA 186. That's this Saturday, June 22nd at Magnus Arena at DU. Very easy to get to. You want to see the next wave of great MMA fighters? This is how you do it. The main event champion Azamat Bekov of Russia defends his middleweight belt against Chauncey Foxworth. Bekov is a wrestler from Russia. Obviously, a lot of different techniques being brought in there. Foxworth, more of a fighter, 6-fight win streak, 28 fights under his belt. That's the main event. And the co-main event, just as interesting, a women's flyweight bout, Russia's Veronika Borisova versus Nayra Rep, the Bosnian bombshell from Bosnia. Rep has won all of her victories by finish. Borisova, the European champion, is undefeated. So I think that's about as good as it gets too. Those are the two main events of the night. Pretty solid. And of course, there'll be more involved there too. LFA is the top development league in the sport, sent over 300 athletes to the UFC, and nearly a third of the UFC's current roster came through LFA as alums. So if you want to see what's next in the MMA world, this is where you want to go. University of Denver, Magnus Arena. You can get tickets available right now at denverpioneers.com. Obviously, Magnus right there on campus. So denverpioneers.com for those tickets. But you follow Mile High Sports on Instagram, you might get some for free because we're giving some away on the Mile High Sports Instagram. That's at Mile High Sports. And while you're there, by the way, for fight fans, check out the terrific interview Jordan Arbel here with the MMA program here on Mile High Sports. Had a chance to talk with Rose Namajunas, the baddest of the bad in the women's side of the sport. A terrific interview there. You can check that all out too. Follow Mile High Sports on Instagram or go to milehighsports.com for that. But go check out LFA 186 this weekend, denverpioneers.com for tickets, or follow us on Instagram at Mile High Sports, and you might get them for free. Sandy, the Rockies are in a bit of a tailspin. They have now won, correct me if I'm wrong, 4 of their last 17 games. That's not great. This one last night, maybe not their fault. The Rockies had a 9-4 lead going into the 9th inning. They gave up 7 runs in the top of the 9th, including
4 of them were their fault. 3 of them perhaps were not.
3 of them perhaps weren't, because as Victor Vodnik looks to close the game out, what would have been the final out of the game? Vodnik appears to strike out Teoscar Hernandez, who takes a nibble and check swings at a high heater, and by all evidence appears to clearly break his wrist, go past the plane, you name it. First base umpire Joe Barksdale does not ring him up, and the sequence of what happens immediately after the game should have been over. Looked like this, courtesy of MLB.
They have most certainly been entertained. Here's the 1-2. He went. Oh, come on, Lance. Lance Barksdale said no.
Lance is saying it was not even close. And so
Buddy, I don't blame Buddy. He just got run. We'll check a replay of that. I'll be shocked if he held up.
Yep, he went.
2-2. In the air, deep right center field, and this one is gone. You gotta be kidding me. From a strikeout to a 3-run homer. 2-2 on Hunter Goodman with 2 outs.
The Dodgers go on to win that game, obviously, by that score right there. And pardon me, I misidentified. If I'm going to pick on an ump, I should identify him correctly. Not Joe Barksdale, Lance Barksdale. My mistake there. Hopefully, also, if you had children around, they weren't lip reading either Bud Black or right fielder Jake Cave.
I mean, imagine that the expression would be both appropriate
and a little blue and little Dodger blue, let's say, perhaps.
Appropriate, profane, but appropriate. And it was a terrible call.
It's a terrible call. And a couple things can be true at the same time. You gave up 4 in the top of the 9th before that.
The game should have been over.
Should have been over. At the same time, Tyler Kinley gave up the 4.
Yes, true.
Kinley was pulled after giving up the 4 in 1/3 of an inning. Vodnik comes in and looked to basically cement it and get out clean until they missed the call on Hernandez, who then yanks the very next pitch into right field, and the Rockies go down and lose this game 11-9. So multiple things can be true. The bullpen didn't do the job. At the same time, I get it. It's the Dodgers. I get it. It's the Rockies. I get it. It's the 9th inning. You want to go home. You can't blow that call. That is a disastrous, obviously missed call by the umpire crew. That's bad.
I don't know how you can look at that and
Arms go past the plane.
that
the wrists
he
break.
didn't swing. Now, why isn't that call reviewable?
Right. Probably should be.
Should be.
Because it's because you can clearly look at it from multiple angles.
And most of the time, if you challenged a call like that, the call on the field would stand. But this is so obvious.
And the funny thing is, when you talk about baseball adjusting and adapting a lot of things, the automatic balls and strikes system, by the way, one of the things in baseball that's kind of fascinating is they may be adjusting what they'll be doing in AAA this year. And that would be not having the machine call all the balls and strikes, having the ump call the balls and strikes, but much like you would see in tennis, having the batters immediately be able to turn back to the ref and say, look at it again. So look at the ump, look at it again.
Yes.
And then the ump they'd look at it upstairs and they'd ping the ump in their helmet and say, okay, no, that was a ball or strike. And then you play on. That to me is a pretty fair compromise from the get-go. Maybe that will help with the major leagues as well and get there rather quickly. But again, baseball at this point, to its credit, has cameras everywhere. They have the ability to track the spin rate of pitches at 4,000 or more RPMs in real time. Certainly you have the technological solution to solve this sort of thing, which literally decided a game. Game would have been over.
I'm not sure I understand why umpiring in Major League Baseball is so bad.
Or why they'd even push against this.
Right.
This helps. I remember when NFL refs, when replay made us to be, NFL refs were irate and furious. Now you talk to NFL refs, they're like, thank goodness for replay, because everyone understands we're human and make mistakes. And when you have a successful challenge, they're not necessarily booing the ref. They're like, oh, they got it right. Okay, great. In baseball, same thing. Don't fight against it. It's there to help you not get these sort of things. Here's the case in point. If Major League Baseball would allow that to be challengeable and it's overturned, the Rockies win, the Dodgers a little frustrated, they go home for the night. You know what we're not talking about? Lance Barksdale. It's just, they didn't call it, but it was challenged and overturned on challenge game.
Right.
Over.
Right.
And umpires are like offensive linemen in football. They don't really want their name out there. I mean,
who was the umpire? Was it Jim Joyce who made the call at first base that deprived
Armando Galarraga of a no-hitter that he should have had.
Right. Yeah, he should have had, and felt so bad about it.
And had it been challengeable,
replay,
would have been fixed.
Would have fixed it. And Jim Joyce felt terrible about it, and Galarraga was very graceful in accepting it. But man, baseball's a game that relies on precision and its history,
and not human error, but precision.
I've never understood the idea that, well, human beings make mistakes and players make mistakes, and so the umpire should be allowed to make mistakes. But when the mistake is that egregious and that obvious,
and if you don't
have to allow it to stand, you could review it if the rules allowed you to. Major League Baseball needs to catch up on something like that. Now, in the big picture, the Dodgers beating the Rockies makes no difference at all. The Rockies win or lose are a last place team. The Dodgers are running away with the division by 9 games. Okay, they lose last night. It's 8.5. It doesn't make
it doesn't
difference in the big picture.
But it's an embarrassment.
But it's bad. It's bad. And the Rocky games are now carried by Major League Baseball. So
properly by Major League Baseball.
In the Major League Baseball office saw that happen.
Well, they've certainly watched it happen on the highlights or lowlights as well. Absolutely. The Rockies fall, even though Brenton Doyle has a 4-for-5 game in which he hits his 6th home run of the year. Ryan McMahon, effective 2-for-5 with a couple of RBI. The Rockies did get 9 runs, and we talk about some things that have been problems. They only struck out 8 times as a team and walked 5 times. 3 of those, by the way, by Nolan Jones, who hasn't been the guy walking. 3 walks in his 4 plate appearances, no strikeouts. This was a good offensive performance for this team. They got it right, and they end up coming up short. And obviously that's frustrating. Shohei Ohtani, if you had a chance to go out and watch him and you were curious to see what he could do, I hope you enjoyed the 476-foot bomb that he dropped as the leadoff hitter last night. The Rockies and Dodgers will go at it again tonight for the third game of their 4-game series. When you look at the pitching matchups, Ryan Feltner, 1-6 for the Rockies. Not all his fault, but some of them definitely so. Will face the 5.71 ERA will face when you're talking about on the Dodgers side at 1-1, 5.4 ERA, Bobby Miller. It's kind of funny when you look at the Dodgers. To a lot of people thinking about those rotations that you could name everybody in it, and you get James Paxton and Bobby Miller in it. And guess what? And then same old Dodgers. You put on a Dodgers uniform, you become a good pitcher somehow by osmosis. It's pretty remarkable. But Rockies and Dodgers will be at it again tonight. No day game despite the Wednesday. It will be a night game, the normal 6:40 p.m. start at Coors Field. For the Dodgers and the Rockies, they'll have one more on Thursday to finish that series. And the Rockies will then at that point be 7 games through their 10-game homestand. But for the Rockies in this case, if you're Bud Black, obviously it's fine to get frustrated about this. Obviously, it's fine to get tossed. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's perfectly justifiable. Jake Cave let Barksdale have it all the way from right field. And you know what? He was
I've never seen that kind of reaction, but
he was right to do it too, quite frankly, because he had basically the same angle as Barksdale, and he saw it. So, I mean, you're talking about, because, Hernandez, of course.
Oh, you could see that from 400 feet away.
Absolutely. And, of course, even Cave can look up at the giant scoreboard and go, hey, wait a minute. So that's frustrating.
That will prove everything.
Right.
Looking at that giant scoreboard.
So a disappointing one for the Rockies, who on this homestand, and we talked about this before, the biggest homestand of the year, a 10-game homestand, and an opportunity to prove that some of what they had done over the previous maybe 30, 35 days was not a fluke. But thus far on that homestand, 5 games through it, they are 1-4, and they have found a lot of interesting ways to lose. They have lost comparatively low-scoring games. They have lost high-scoring games. And, of course, the one they won, they scored 16 runs on. But they have to find a way. You're already 1-4 with 5 more to go. This could sink fast because you blow this homestand, and let's say the Dodgers come up with a sweep. This is a disaster. And it's hard to say disaster when you're the last-place team.
On pace to lose 107 games.
But you'll be back on that pace again for a while.
Lose maybe 110.
And you talked about it, Sandy, the idea that the attendance lags behind results. The Rockies put together a pretty good, maybe not calendar month, but a month, a 30-day span in which they played.
Month of May was 14 or 13.
They played winning baseball. And now the wheels come off again in June, and everybody understands, okay, that was a bit of a mirage. And now who knows? I mean, let's face it. This was the Dodgers, right? Plenty of Dodgers fans show up for Rockies.
As you heard.
Right?
As you heard.
The Pittsburgh series in the last 2 games drew more than 40,000. The first 2 games of the Dodgers, 32,000, 33,000 last night for the Dodgers and Shohei Ohtani. Uh-oh.
What do you think the percentage was of Dodger fans? More than 50%.
Oh, yeah. I was about to say 60.
Yeah.
60%.
That's about right.
And it might be more than that tonight. And wait till the Thursday day game finishes it off. That'll be like 80% Dodgers fans, especially if the Dodgers win again tonight. So obviously a pretty tough road for the Rockies. They've got to find a way to get it right. Sandy gets to wear the Karnak the Magnificent hat there for calling last night's game in the Stanley Cup. Had that thing nailed absolutely right. But an opportunity to talk a little bit about, getting peckish. It's in the afternoon. You're maybe thinking about getting hungry. Here's how to plan your dinner.
You've heard their signature ads for many, many years now, and probably know that locally owned and operated GB Fish and Chips has the best drinks, meat pies, and fish and chips in America. But did you know that they cater as well, GB Fish and Chips, with graduation season having come and gone, but summer block party season right here, right now. Give your friends and family a unique fry-on-site experience. And the best part of all of that is that you don't have to do any of the work yourself. You can enjoy the party and let GB Fish and Chips go to work for you. Stop by any of their 4 metro locations or visit gbfishandchips.com and bring authentic fish and chips to your next gathering. That's gbfishandchips.com.
Well, we talked about the Stanley Cup Finals last night. Pardon me, final. NBA Finals, Stanley Cup Final. So you tell me why one is one and one is the other, but oddly, they're both grammatically correct because sometimes English is weird. But as the headline there below shows it, McDavid McDoes it. 4 points for Connor McDavid again. Second straight game with 4 points. Oilers end up taking a 3-0 lead. They hold on to win it 5-3. Now it is a 3-2 series after being 3-0 for Florida. Game 6 will be Friday in Edmonton, where the Oilers are now red hot. This thing might go 7, Sandy. It really might go 7.
Well, could go 7. We've seen it on other occasions when it's 3-0 in the Stanley Cup Final, go 6. It's rare that it goes 7. Almost no one wins. Toronto, I mentioned yesterday, in 1942, it turned out.
So
43,
it's not a recent
42.
sample.
Toronto beat Detroit after Detroit raced out to a 3-0 lead in the Stanley Cup Final, again, back in 1942, when the NHL was just in its infant stage.
Goaltenders didn't have masks.
Right around the original 6 era. I think the original 6 might have started the next year.
Play. Yeah.
The true original 6. But absolutely. The tempo of the series has changed. At least the first half of the game last night. It's become Edmonton's tempo. Go-go style, fire wagon hockey, as they call it.
Which is what we talked about. If Edmonton could play the high-scoring game, if the Edmonton Oilers had sort of a limited as a team that wasn't as deep, certainly top-heavy with McDavid and Draisaitl and Hyman and their scoring ability, the idea that Florida had a couple different ways to win. They had the goaltending advantage. They were deeper. They were better defensively. They had a couple different pathways to winning. Edmonton, if they were going to win, we're going to have to win some high-scoring games,
yes,
and actually start putting the pedal to the metal. Well, guess what? The worm has turned. And you talk about the idea of how much it's changed at this point, looking at FanDuel, Caesars Sportsbook, Bet365, DraftKings, BetMGM, all of them, 120 favorites or more for Game 6.
Well, Oilers. Of course. The Oilers have to be favored at home in Game 6. They played okay, a little bit better in Game 3 than they had played in the first 2 games. But get this, first 8 periods of the series, okay, that's Game 1, Game 2, and the first 2 periods of Game 3. 11 goals to 2 in favor of Florida. From that point forward, through the 6:52 mark of the second period last night, the goals favored Edmonton 13-1.
Oh, my goodness.
13-1.
That is
now. Florida played better the second half of the game.
Significant.
And I'm sure there's Tkachuk woke up the second half of the game. Tkachuk woke up and produced a multi-point night. He had been silent. He had like 1 goal in 15 games or something going in. And yet, even without last change, Edmonton had McDavid out there with Vogel and Hyman, pretty much against Barkov, Reinhart, and Rodriguez.
Right.
And
Rodriguez, second star again, by the way. Another
coach. And Rodriguez played very well.
Finals
goal and assist, 2 points, plus 3 for him. But Barkov was -2, and Reinhart was -2. And McDavid had a 2-goal, 2-assist night, another 4-point night, I believe, for the second straight game, if I'm not mistaken. 8 points in 2 games. And Bouchard was tremendous on defense, although he made one of the dumber plays I've seen in a Stanley Cup playoff series of any kind, when with a 3-0 lead in the second period, he was caught at least 60 feet from his own goal when they turned it over. Now, he didn't turn it over, but he was out of position when the turnover was made, and Tkachuk all of a sudden is behind the defense. It's 3-0 at that point. You can't leave your goaltender by his lonesome.
But who ends up saving that? Who ends up gets back and scoops that up in time? McDavid again, who finds a way to get back and then turns around and get that.
Well, they came on and scored. They scored the next goal because McDavid set up Perry on the power play, and that was another thing. They lead with a shorthanded goal for the second straight game. This time it's Brown.
That's a recipe for
it was Jan Mark, I think, the other night. And then it was Hyman on the power play, and Perry on the power play. So they got their power play going, the 5-on-4.
Also,
the only power play goal they had scored in the series is 5-on-3 up until last night. And they were 2 for 4 on the power play, and they missed on their first power play attempt. I can't remember if the second they got it right at the end. That was the other thing. The 2 power play goals they scored were right at the end of the power play with just seconds remaining. They had killed off most of the penalty, and just with the few seconds remaining, both Hyman and Perry scored the goals. And the McDavid play to set up Perry was just, that's a play only McDavid and maybe McKinnon makes. Maybe McKinnon.
Yeah, that's probably
players who are centers.
Get this. Now, Edmonton, obviously the offense is cooking, but now in this series, how about this? Bouchard is the second leading scorer for Edmonton. No goals and 5 assists for 5 points. So 3 assists last night, 5 points on the series. Fogle and Holloway and Hyman have 3 points. Draisaitl has 2. So not exactly an across-the-board performance of a lot of points.
Draisaitl still has not scored a goal.
No, he has not. McDavid, however, has 3 goals, which is more points than anybody else on his team has except for Bouchard. And now 11 points in 5 games and plus 4 in a series in which they are still losing.
3 games to 2. Right.
That's a problem because the best player on earth, the most dynamic offensive force on earth, is now blazing hot. And if he's not in Bobrovsky's head, he probably should be.
Well, I don't know if it's just Bobrovsky. I think
he's in the whole defense.
You look at their defensive group, and Forsling's a premier defensive defenseman.
Yeah, he is.
Kind of reminds me of Foot. The only difference being, I think Forsling's left-handed and Foot was right-handed. But he plays the same role for Florida as Foot did all those years for the Avs. And you've got 2 other pretty good defense pairings, and they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do with McDavid now. He's kind of come out of the cage, so to speak, and he's been unleashed, and they don't know how to defend him. And they tried mixing up their lines last night, and they even mixed, I think, a little bit their defense pairings, so that it didn't make that much of a difference. And then McDavid scores the empty net goal.
And they did make it up. They had Forsling and Ekblad at that top, and then Montour down on the second with Mikkola, and then Kulikov on the third with Ekman Larson.
Well, yeah, but they even mixed those.
They mixed those up during the game. Right. And
but Bobrovsky, you're right in the sense that the 23 shots on goal, I mean, it was 32-24 in shots in favor of Florida. They were that good the second half of the game. They scored to make it 4-3 at 4:04 of the third period. So they had plenty of time to get the equalizer, but I don't know that it was in the cards that they were going to get it. And you can't drop into a 3-0, 4-1 hole against Edmonton when Edmonton is controlling the pace of the game.
That's the problem is Edmonton plays, they're designed to play with the lead. And if they get it, they are a danger. Now, to kick it back a little bit, if you're Florida, obviously you're still only 1 game away from claiming the Stanley Cup. So you can't be moping about it. You're still in control of the series, not by much.
You've also got to travel a long ways. And people think we're exaggerating that. It's the greatest distance between 2 teams in the Stanley Cup Final in the history of the Stanley Cup
it's actually almost impossible. The only possibly longer trip would be to Vancouver.
And you've got to recover from the trip. And that does take a little bit of time. Now, did Florida find its game during the second half?
That's my question.
Last night,
did they do enough?
Maybe just a little bit, and they got some of their confidence back.
That's the important question, I think.
But I think they're going to have to do it after losing Game 6 in Game 7 at home. And I still think their chances are pretty good of winning the series, but their chances are not great when they play the Oilers in Edmonton.
Right. I mean, this may go 7, and you are talking about a series of some significant import. The greatest player in hockey, probably the greatest offensive player since Wayne Gretzky, having a chance to claim his first
Imagine
Stanley Cup.
Being so good that you can get away with through 5 games, Draisaitl not scoring a goal. That's how good McDavid is. He really, I mean, McKinnon can do this. Very few guys can carry a team.
And again,
he can carry
11 points, but 8 of them assists. When you talk about players, the elite scorers, of which nobody will question that Connor McDavid is an elite scorer. But you also talk about guys that make their teams better and make their teammates better. That's McDavid too.
And he only plays 5 minutes out of every 12.
You are watching
that kind of impact.
greatness.
That's every shift.
Yeah.
And, of course, on the 4 power plays they had. Major factor. Because he controls the puck all the time in the power play.
Just getting into the Stanley Cup Finals, or you're just getting into it, or you're Avs fans, you lapsed, and you haven't maybe watched a lot of Connor McDavid. If you'd like to watch, let's say, the hockey equivalent of Michael Jordan in his prime in the 80s, it's happening on the ice.
He has a chance in this series, especially if it goes 7, to break the all-time points record of the Stanley Cup.
And which he would unquestionably
win. Gretzky with 47 has the record.
47.
And I think McDavid's at 41 or 42.
That's absolutely insane. But that's what you're talking about. And yeah, he's at 42, as a matter of fact, in 23 games.
They can get 5 points if they play 2 games.
Yeah.
I think it's within reach.
34 assists in 23 Stanley Cup playoff games.
That's amazing.
That's almost comical. Those are video game numbers. Actually, I'm not even sure if you can do that in a video game with Connor McDavid. So this is really special stuff, and we'll find out more about it when they play Game 6 on Friday in Edmonton. It's been a real treat talking to you. Very happy Juneteenth for those who don't understand necessarily what that is. Portmanteau, which means 2 words that we kind of smushed together, right? Of June and 19th. Back in 1865 in Galveston, Texas, that was the final implementation of the Emancipation Proclamation by Abraham Lincoln, the final place in the country in which it was fully aware and fully legislated and fully pushed for that slaves were freed. And so that's why we celebrate Juneteenth. First state to celebrate it, actually, as expected, Texas celebrated Juneteenth first, and it became a federal holiday back in 2021. But it originally comes from the end, essentially the formal end of slavery, when the Emancipation Proclamation was finally, it is given its final order in Galveston, Texas. Took obviously years after and time after the Civil War to complete to get out to all the territories. But Juneteenth today, obviously a reason for celebration for all Americans, and one of the reasons that we talk about it today too. So a very happy Juneteenth, the day in which the United States of America became a more perfect union, and a good opportunity to celebrate as well. We'll be back at it tomorrow. A lot of exciting stuff to talk about. It was delightful to get to talk about it with you as always. Thanks to Danny Bailey, the man that makes all of this work. That, of course, is Sandy Clough. I'm Shawn Drotar. If you liked what you saw, there's a little button down there. It's red. It says subscribe. You can just click on it, and then we'll let you know when we're about to be on, when we're on live. You can check out every single one of those. However you consumed the show, though, whether it was live on YouTube, whether you're watching it delayed on YouTube, whether you caught it on the podcast, whether you're at milehighsports.com, whether you're on the free Mile High Sports app, every single one of them. Thank you so much. We appreciate each and every one of you for being here every day. We look forward to getting back at it tomorrow with you. For Danny and Sandy, I'm Shawn. Thanks for watching. This is Mile High Sports.
What?